Thank you for coming. Senator Scott Jensen from Carver County. Good ideas lead to good policy. Good policy leads to good legislation. That's why we're here today. Today at 1 o'clock in the State Gov Committee, we're going to finally get a hearing for Senate File 752.
Yeah.
And this is about ballot inclusion. This is about having access to the ballot for all Minnesotans. We talk about elections, we talk about ballot privacy, we need to talk about ballot inclusion. I'm going to step aside and let a couple of advocates speak to the issue specifically, but I'll say this. I don't know why Minnesota would fear having greater access to the ballot. When you compare what Minnesota requires to the states around us, there's nothing even remotely resembling fairness. When we require in Minnesota more than 5 times the number of signatures that other neighboring states require in order to get major political party status, there's a problem. Minnesota is a leader. We can lead in elections, we lead in voter turnout, we lead in transparency. But when it comes to fairness and ballot inclusion, we're not leading. So today at 1 o'clock when I present Senate File 752 in front of Senator Kiffmeyer's committee, it'll be a big day for us and we finally got here.
Yes.
I want to introduce Mr. Chris Holbrook. He's the chairman of the Minnesota Libertarian Party, and he's been the lead advocate as we try to balance integrity and access. Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I really want to thank Dr. Jensen for being a champion for the fight that all minor parties face in Minnesota. It's an uphill battle, as he said, to simply get access to the ballot. Our proposal, which was authored a year ago by Rep. Elkins and Senator Jensen, changes the threshold either to collect signatures beforehand or collect signatures afterhand, the percent on the ballot as a result, similar to what other states have done. We are a clear outlier. We are at less than a dozen states left who have such rigid restrictions on running for office. We're asking for the window to petition and file to be expanded, and we're asking for the oath on these petitions to be altered. Right now, if you sign our petitions, you can go to jail for felony perjury if you vote in a primary. That's not right. That's not Minnesotan. We can expand access and inclusion and actually strengthen our integrity. This is not about the Republican Party, not about the Democrat Party. This is about all parties, and this is about every voice being heard in Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I would like to introduce Trahern Cruz. He's the state chair of the Green Party of Minnesota.
I'd like to thank Chris Holbrook and Senator Jensen for working on this historic measure for the state of Minnesota. An overwhelming majority of citizens want more choices at the ballot on their November ballot. Restrictive voter access laws severely limit voter choice and democratic participation. Unfortunately, the 2 major parties have created terrible restrictive ballot access laws designed specifically to keep third parties off the ballot. Illinois, Indiana, and New York have very strict ballot access laws, and so does Minnesota. Not only do these laws keep independents and third parties off the ballot, they keep working class people off the ballot too. Third parties and independent candidates in Minnesota in a governor's race, for instance, have a 2-week window to gather 2,000 signatures. This is a very daunting task for working class people who want to be civically engaged, who also want more choices on the ballot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Choice and inclusion.
We encourage our 2 major parties here in Minnesota to pass just comprehensive ballot access legislation here in Minnesota. And for the Green Party, the National Green Party, our ballot access coordinator is Brendan Phillips. I'd like to hand it over to Phil of the Independence Party. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, my name is Phil Fuhrer, state chair of the Independence Party, the Independence Alliance Party, now here in Minnesota. I want to thank Senator Scott Jensen for getting us a hearing on this.
Thank you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Representative Steve Elkins for carrying a companion bill in the House.
Thank you.
And I especially want to thank the Libertarian Party, Chris Holbrook, for taking the lead on this. Bringing us together and making sure that this happened.
Minnesotans want to have more choices at the ballot box. And for more than a quarter century, the Independence Party, the Independence Alliance, has offered some of those choices. We won the governorship with Jesse Ventura. We won a state Senate seat. We've provided thoughtful discourse with such candidates as former Congressman Tim Penny, U.S. Senator Dean Barkley, Ross Perot, Tom Horner, and others. But being 1,800 votes, a tenth of a percent short in 2014, and having more than 103 Minnesotans vote for our candidate in 2018, moved us down to minor party status. That was not enough. Ooh. And that showed us the systemic bias in the state's political processes. This legislation works to level those rules so that additional voices are able to be put on the ballot, so that voters can decide which voices and which message resonates most with them. We look forward to this legislation being heard today, moving on, and getting the needed adjustments in state statute so that the field is level for everyone and we can have more voices at the ballot box.
Yes.
Thank you.
This isn't a revolution. We're not asking for something bizarre and crazy. Instead of having a requirement for 130,000 signatures, we're asking to get in line with neighboring states, whether it be 10,000 or 3,000. But to go from 10,000 from our neighboring states to 130,000 is ridiculous. And if someone wanted to run in a state Senate race as an independent, the fact that they're being given 14 days to get the necessary signatures instead of other states where they'll give you 2.5 months. It seems totally unnecessary. So the bottom line is, Minnesota, we can lead in being fair, we can lead in being transparent. There's nothing to be afraid of. As other speakers have already mentioned, we have had excellent candidates, thoughtful, well-accomplished candidates previously from parties other than the Republican and Democratic Party. Now, I do want to make one footnote. Last year when we talked about this bill, there was a problem as we tried to make sure that parties would be able to protect themselves from outliers jumping onto their, if you will, their ballot. And so we've fixed that this year with an amendment that will take away the ability for good candidates to be sliced and diced away from the process. So the concern that came up last year has been fixed, and I appreciate it again. Are there any questions? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
I do hear from both major parties a lot of talk about election integrity, which I fully support, and I'm on board with that. But what about ballot access? I mean, isn't ballot inclusion the first step in having an election with integrity?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think if we're going to talk about integrity in elections, and then, oh, but by the way, we're only going to allow certain privileged individuals or parties to get access to the ballot, that doesn't sound like a great deal of integrity. So if we're going to talk about election integrity, and we're going to talk about ballot privacy, and we're going to talk about provisional ballots, and we're going to talk about voter ID, when we're going to talk about those things, we should be talking about ballot inclusion and freedom to choose and balancing access and integrity. So thanks again. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
If this had been in place already, would we have 7 major parties in Minnesota, or would some of you still not have?
The question is, if what this bill does were successful previously, looking at the results of the last election, how many major parties would we now have?
Correct, we would have 7, because to Phil's point, his party has received over 100,000 votes in the last election, which is 4%. Our party received over 100,000 votes in 2016, which is 3%. The Green Party in that election, I believe Jill Stein received 1.5%. The only benefit to us for major party status is access to the ballot for all 201 legislative races, which right now we have to get 5% in either the U.S. President or the U.S. Senate race to be able to be allowed to run candidates for all the state offices. That's contrary to what we want to do, and we're asking for help so that we can participate in our local system of politics.
So in 2022, 201 representatives and senators will be up for election. The only way the Independent Party, the Libertarian Party, the Green Party could get someone on that is to go through the arduous process of collecting signatures in 14 days. The 5% or 130,000 signatures required, there's only 2 races you could do that in this November. One of them is the presidency and the other is the U.S. Senate. Those are slim pickings because people are going to most likely say, I want to vote for one of the 2 major parties because I want my vote to have maximum impact. That may or may not be true. But the fact of the matter is, it really puts a lot of Minnesotans out of the game because they're not going to get it.
I know Phil's got some candidates lined up in legislative and congressional races. Do your parties plan to field a U.S. Senate candidate in 2020?
My party does not want to field the U.S. Senate candidate. We don't care about the federal system in Washington, D.C. We care about the system in Minnesota. We're a state party. We care about state politics, and that's where we want to play. It's a diversion of our resources, a waste of our time, money, and people to focus on U.S. President and U.S. Senate, which we have 0 chance at competing in. We don't want to compete, but the state of Minnesota forces us to do that to access participating in the state rounds.
Phil for your Independence Party, the Independence Alliance. We believe we've found a U.S. Senate candidate. And one of the reasons we're running a U.S. Senate candidate is to get major party status back. Without ballot access, it's a slog to go out there and gather petition signatures. If you've never done it, join us in May and early June here this year and help us out, and you'll find out how much of a slog it is. Getting major party ballot access is critical to parties being able to exist and compete. And in some ways, then, as Chris had said, we're forced into running a U.S. Senate candidate because that's the route that we have to take for a shot at getting major party status back.
And just to follow up on what Phil said, we do have our presidential primaries are this Tuesday at 4200 Cedar for the Green Party, and we also have a Senate candidate, Scott Ruscavage, that will be seeking our endorsement in the next month or so. But we have to run candidates at those levels to try to keep our minor party status.
And just to point out one other ridiculous feature of our present legislation is if these folks go out and do the hard work and get the signatures, if they don't have it on the right size paper, the signatures don't count. And on top of that, they have to get a signature from the individual who's signing the petition that basically says, I want this person on the ballot, and because I'm signing this, I pledge that I won't do this, this, or this in terms of engaging the political process, voting for someone else. It may well be that they want that person on the ballot to further and expand the conversation. But once they sign, they put themselves at risk of committing a felony if they choose to vote for someone else.
That ain't right.
No. Thanks much for coming. Thank you.